My daughter said I'm too old for my own house, so I gave it to my neighbor. I never thought I'd hear my own daughter say this to me. I was sitting in my living room, the one I've lived in for 35 years, and she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Dad, you're too old for this house. You need to move." I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. Too old? For my own home? My heart sank, and I felt like the ground had just opened beneath me. But I didn't react right away. I wanted to understand and maybe get a little revenge. My name is John. I'm 72 years old, a retired mechanic, and I've lived in this house since my kids were little. It's old, sure, but it's mine. I've fixed the leaks, painted the walls, and planted a garden that my late wife loved. My daughter, Emily, she's 42, successful, lives in a fancy condo across town. She visits maybe twice a month, always in a rush. I thought she cared, but that day, I realized I was wrong. After my wife passed 5 years ago, I've managed the house myself, but lately, Emily has been helping a lot, or trying to. She would call me every other day with new ideas about downsizing, moving, selling. I humored her at first, thinking she meant well. But then it got personal. It was a Saturday morning. I was drinking my coffee on the porch, watching the birds, when Emily came over holding her tablet like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Dad," she said, "we need to talk about the house. You can't keep living here alone. It's unsafe." I frowned. "Unsafe? I've lived here for decades and handled everything myself." She waved her hand. "It's not about handling things. It's about being realistic. You're too old for this house." Her words hit me like a punch. "Too old?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "Emily, this is my home. I built a life here. You don't just decide I'm too old." She rolled her eyes. "Dad, I'm trying to help. You should think about moving to a smaller place. It's what's best for you." I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and hurt. "Best for me?" I asked quietly. "Or best for you to control my life?" That day, I realized she wasn't just worried. She wanted me out. And suddenly, an idea started to form in my mind. I couldn't fight her with words, but I could fight her with action. Over the next few weeks, I started making small changes. I cleaned the house differently, rearranged furniture, invited neighbors over for dinner. One neighbor, Mr. Parker, a kind man in his 70s who had always admired my garden, noticed my efforts. We started chatting every morning, sharing stories, and laughing like old friends. Emily kept calling, "Dad, have you thought about selling? You shouldn't stay here alone." I smiled politely and said, "I'm fine." But inside, I was planning. I contacted my lawyer and quietly prepared a deed to transfer the house to Mr. Parker, making sure everything was legal and binding. The day I signed the papers, Emily stormed over. "Dad, what are you doing? You can't just give away the house." I looked at her, calm and steady. "I can," and I did. Her face turned red. She shouted, "This isn't fair. This is my inheritance." I shrugged. "Maybe you should have treated your father with respect before assuming he'd follow your plans." She was speechless. That day, I felt a mix of satisfaction and sorrow, but mostly justice. My house, my rules, my life. I didn't need to prove anything with anger. The law, my actions, and common sense had done it for me. The moral is simple. Respect goes both ways. You can't demand control over someone else's life just because you think you know better. And sometimes, justice isn't loud or messy. It's quiet, firm, and fair. I lost a daughter's understanding that day, but I gained peace in my home. After the shock of the deed signing, life settled into an uneasy quiet. My daughter, Emily, stopped coming over as often. Calls went from daily nagging about downsizing to brief, clipped messages that ended before I could respond. I won't lie, at first it hurt. I had spent decades raising her, guiding her, and now it felt like a wall had risen between us. But as the days went by, I began to notice something I hadn't before. The house felt alive again. Without the tension that had been growing, the room seemed warmer, the garden brighter. Mr. Parker, my new neighbor and now the legal owner of my house, was a delight. He was gentle, kind, and had a sense of humor that made me laugh more than I had in years. He treated the house with care, but also gave me the freedom to stay as long as I liked. It was a strange feeling, almost like I was living rent-free in my own home, but it was also liberating. One afternoon, I was tending the roses when Mr. Parker came by with 2 mugs of tea. "John," he said, "you've done wonders with this place. I can't believe you've lived here all these years alone." I laughed softly, feeling a surge of pride. "Well, it's been my sanctuary. My wife and I built it with our hands and hearts. I couldn't just leave it to someone who didn't understand that." He nodded, sipping his tea. "I understand more than you think. You've given me the gift of a beautiful home, but you've also given yourself peace." I realized he was right. For the first time in a long time, I felt free from the constant nagging, the judgment, and the pressure of living under someone else's idea of what was best for me. Emily, however, did not let this go quietly. One week after the deed transfer, she showed up at the garden gate, arms crossed and face red with anger. "Dad," she started, her voice trembling, "this is ridiculous. You can't just give away your inheritance. Mom would never have wanted this." I set down my trowel and looked at her calmly. "Emily, your mother trusted me to manage this house. And now, I've decided it's best for me to let someone I trust take care of it while I continue living here. That doesn't make me wrong. It makes me wise enough to know my own limits." She scoffed. "Limits? You're just being stubborn. You're punishing me because I told you the truth." I shook my head. "I'm not punishing you, Emily. I'm protecting myself. And maybe teaching a lesson about respect." She didn't speak for a long moment, staring at me like I had lost my mind. Then she turned and stormed off, muttering something about lawyers and lawsuits. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's visits grew even less frequent. But word traveled fast. Friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives began to hear about what happened. Some were shocked that I had the courage to stand up to my own daughter. Others were delighted that justice had finally caught up to someone who had been pushy and self-centered for so long. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I heard a soft knock at the door. It was Mrs. Thompson, a neighbor from down the street. "John," she said, "I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. That woman has always been hard on you, but you handled it with grace." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Thank you. It wasn't easy, but it had to be done." And then came the unexpected twist. A few days later, I received a call from a local attorney representing Emily. "Mr. Johnson," the lawyer said, "my client would like to negotiate a settlement regarding the house transfer." I chuckled softly, setting the phone down. Negotiation? After all the shouting, the guilt trips, the emotional manipulation, I knew exactly what I wanted. When Emily arrived with her lawyer, she looked nervous, almost timid. "Dad, I just want to make this right," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I met her gaze steadily. "Emily, nothing about this was unfair. I made a choice that was best for me, and now you must live with the consequences of your actions." Her lawyer tried to interject, but I shook my head. "No, let her speak for herself." Emily swallowed hard. I suppose I was wrong. I didn't understand your perspective. I thought I was helping, but I was controlling. I'm sorry, Dad." The words were halting, but sincere. I felt a strange mix of relief and vindication. "Thank you, Emily. That's all I wanted to hear. Respect goes both ways. Maybe one day we can rebuild our relationship, but for now, I need to live my life on my terms." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and left quietly. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its peaceful rhythm. I spent my mornings tending the garden, my afternoons chatting with Mr. Parker, and my evenings reading by the fireplace. Emily called occasionally, but the calls were no longer filled with judgment or demands. She had learned a lesson in humility, and I had reclaimed the serenity of my home. And then came the moment of quiet satisfaction. One morning, I saw Emily helping a neighbor carry groceries. She smiled and waved at me, and for the first time in months, I waved back without any bitterness. Justice had been served, not through anger or revenge, but through calm determination and the quiet power of making one's own choices. The moral of this chapter is simple. Life is too short to live under someone else's control, even if that someone is your own child. Sometimes the best way to teach a lesson is not with shouting, but with action. And sometimes the universe rewards patience and wisdom with a kind of quiet, undeniable karma. I may have lost the support I expected from my daughter, but I gained peace, dignity, and a reminder that respect is earned, not demanded. Life had started to feel like it was settling into a rhythm, calm and predictable, but of course, life rarely stays calm for long. One crisp autumn morning, I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I noticed a moving truck parked across the street. Curiosity got the better of me, so I stepped closer and realized it was Emily. Well, not just her, but her new husband, Mark, who I had met only a few times at holiday dinners. They were hauling boxes into the house she had bought nearby, and my first instinct was to smile, thinking maybe she had finally learned to live her own life without meddling in mine. But that smile quickly faded when I noticed the way she looked at me, her expression sharp, almost calculating. A week later, I received a letter in the mail from the county assessor's office. My stomach sank as I read it. Emily had filed a petition claiming that the house transfer to Mr. Parker was invalid due to undue influence. I couldn't believe it. After all the legal steps, all the careful planning, she was trying to take the house back. My hands shook as I read the letter over and over. I felt a mix of fury and disbelief. How could my own daughter stoop so low? I thought about confronting her immediately, but I knew better. I had learned in the past few months that patience and planning were stronger than anger. I contacted my lawyer, Mr. Benson, an older gentleman with a calm demeanor who had handled estate matters for decades. He chuckled when I explained the situation. "John," he said, "she's upset because she expected control. But you followed every legal procedure. There's nothing she can do. She's barking up the wrong tree." His words soothed me somewhat, but I knew the real challenge was not just legal. It was emotional. Emily had to realize that her manipulations wouldn't work anymore. Over the next few days, I watched as she tried to rally support from relatives, friends, even distant neighbors. She called my younger brother, Tom, hoping he would side with her. "Uncle Tom, you know Dad's not thinking clearly. This house should be in the family," she pleaded over the phone. Tom, bless him, just laughed. "Emily, your father knows exactly what he's doing. Maybe you should take a page from his book and grow up a little." I heard the conversation from the kitchen window and couldn't help but chuckle. Karma was in motion, and it was quiet but effective. Then came the unexpected twist. One evening, I received a call from Mr. Parker. "John," he said, voice urgent, "I just found out something interesting. Emily has been trying to sell her new house to a developer. They want to build a chain of condos, and she's trying to flip it for a huge profit. It's ironic, isn't it?" I laughed bitterly. It was ironic indeed. She had spent months trying to control my life, and now she was chasing money in her own. I realized then that life had a way of balancing itself. The more she pushed, the more her own actions reflected her motives back at her. A few weeks later, the county officially dismissed her petition. The house legally belonged to Mr. Parker, and I was free to continue living there. I felt a rush of relief, but also a strange kind of satisfaction. I invited Mr. Parker over for a celebratory dinner, and we sat by the fireplace, sharing stories and toasting with glasses of iced tea. "John," he said, smiling, "you handled that beautifully. I've seen people lose their temper, sue, or fight endlessly. But you just let life handle her." I nodded, feeling the warmth of victory mixed with peace. Emily, of course, was not finished. A month later, she showed up at the front gate, looking furious but also desperate. "Dad," she said, "I just want to talk. Can we work something out?" I studied her carefully. Her eyes were hard, but there was a flicker of vulnerability. "Emily," I said softly, "we can talk, but I won't change my decisions. I've learned something important these past months. Respect has to be mutual. You can't demand control over someone's life just because you feel entitled." She swallowed hard, and for a moment, I saw the little girl I had raised, not the angry adult she had become. I didn't realize," she whispered. I thought I was helping." I took a deep breath. Helping doesn't mean overriding someone's life. You needed to learn that lesson, and I'm glad you were starting to understand. In the following weeks, Emily's attitude slowly shifted. She no longer tried to control my home or push me into moving. Instead, she began to respect my choices, visiting occasionally, sometimes bringing flowers or helping with small chores. It was a delicate truce, built on the foundation of hard lessons learned. Meanwhile, I continued my peaceful routine, morning walks, tending the garden, enjoying long talks with Mr. Parker. Life felt lighter, quieter, and infinitely more satisfying. Then came a final twist, one I had not expected. Emily, in a rare moment of reflection, called me late one evening. "Dad," she said, voice trembling, "I want to apologize. I realize now that I tried to take something from you that was never mine. You were right all along." I felt a swell of emotion. I had imagined this moment countless times, but never thought it would actually come. "Emily," I replied, "it's never too late to do the right thing. I forgive you. Just remember this lesson for the rest of your life." She cried softly over the phone, and I held on to the words we shared. It was a victory, yes, but more than that, it was closure. The moral of this part of my story is clear. Life will test your boundaries, sometimes in ways you cannot predict. Family can push, prod, and try to control you. But if you remain firm, patient, and wise, justice finds its own path. Emily tried to take away my home, my peace, and my dignity. But in the end, the truth, legality, and respect for one's own life prevailed. Karma has a subtle way of teaching lessons, and sometimes you only need to step aside and let it work. I had defended not just a house, but my right to live on my terms, and that victory felt sweeter than any argument, any court case, or any lecture could have provided. Life had felt calm for a few months, but I should have known better. Peace, especially in a family, is fragile. One chilly evening, as I was reading by the fireplace, the phone rang. It was Emily. My heart sank immediately. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "you won't believe what happened." I braced myself. "What is it, Emily?" She paused, then spoke through quiet sobs. "Mark, he's in trouble. There's a lawsuit. The developer is suing him for a breach of contract, and it might ruin us." I felt a flicker of concern, but also a strange sense of clarity. Life has a way of showing people the consequences of their choices, sometimes in ways they cannot ignore. The next day, Emily showed up on my porch, holding a stack of papers. "Dad, I need your advice. I never realized how complicated life could get when you make the wrong choices." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in months, I saw someone humbled. "Emily," I said, "you've been pushing, demanding, and trying to control what isn't yours. Now you're learning a lesson the hard way. But I'll help you, not because I owe you, but because you're still my daughter." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Dad. I've learned more than I ever wanted to." Over the next few weeks, I found myself drawn into Emily's chaos, not by choice, but by circumstance. She was frantic, calling me at odd hours, panicking about the lawsuit, and making decisions without thinking. I had to step in carefully. "Emily, slow down," I said one evening, holding her hands firmly. "You're making things worse. You have to listen before you act." She nodded reluctantly, exhausted and defeated. It was painful to see her like this, but part of me also felt vindicated. After all, she had spent so many years trying to control me. Now she had to face the consequences of her own recklessness. Then came a bombshell. One afternoon, Mr. Parker came over, looking unusually serious. "John," he said, "I need to show you something." He led me to the garden, where a small package had been delivered. Inside was a letter from the developer suing Emily and Mark. The letter was thick with legal jargon, threats, and demands. I read it carefully and then looked at Mr. Parker. "This is serious," he said, "but not hopeless. There's a flaw in their claim. We can use it." I felt a surge of determination. This was my moment, not just to help, but to ensure that justice was served. I spent the next several days meticulously going over the documents. I made calls, checked references, and even spoke to a few legal experts. Emily was hovering, anxious and desperate. "Dad, what if we lose everything?" she asked, voice breaking. I turned to her, my eyes steady. "Emily, you've learned the hard way that rash actions have consequences. But if we're careful, if we act wisely, we can turn this around. Listen to me and follow my lead." She nodded, swallowing her pride. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of true connection between us, not the strained, angry interactions of the past, but genuine cooperation. The courtroom drama was intense. Emily and Mark sat beside me, looking tense, while the developer's team spoke with sharp, confident voices. I stayed calm, presenting evidence, highlighting errors, and showing how the contract had been misrepresented. Emily watched in awe as I spoke, realizing just how much she had underestimated me. "Dad, you're incredible," she whispered at one point. I smiled faintly. "Experience, Emily. Never forget, wisdom comes from experience, not impulse." Then came the twist no one expected. Midway through the hearing, the developer's lawyer tried a sneaky maneuver, introducing a new clause that supposedly invalidated our defense. The judge paused, eyebrows raised. I leaned forward, heart racing, and calmly countered, pointing out a legal precedent and a misinterpretation of the clause. The room went silent for a moment. Even the lawyer looked stunned. The judge nodded slowly. "Objection overruled," he said. I felt a thrill of victory, but I stayed composed. Emily squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. "Dad, I can't believe it." The climax of the battle came when the developer tried one last desperate tactic, threatening to bring in Emily's family connections to intimidate us. Emily, flustered, turned to me. "Dad, I can't handle this." I placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Emily, you've spent years trying to control me. Now watch closely. Calmness, preparation, and truth are more powerful than fear. Let me handle this." I stepped forward, calmly presenting every piece of evidence and testimony we had collected. The room listened in silence. Finally, the judge slammed his gavel. "Case dismissed. The claims are without merit." Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. Emily fell into my arms, sobbing. I understand now," she whispered. "I was wrong, so wrong." After the courtroom, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Emily still visited, but now with humility and respect. Mark was grateful, but had learned a valuable lesson about impulsiveness. Mr. Parker and I continued our daily routines, enjoying the simple pleasures of gardening, reading, and sipping tea on the porch. And through it all, I realized something important. Sometimes the universe tests not just patience, but courage, wisdom, and moral strength. Standing firm, making careful choices, and refusing to be bullied or manipulated. These are what ultimately lead to justice. The moral of this part is simple yet powerful. Life will throw storms at you, sometimes from the people you love most. Family conflicts, financial pressure, and manipulation are tests, and the way you respond determines the outcome. Reacting with anger or haste only fuels chaos, but patience, intelligence, and calm resolve will always prevail. Emily tried to undermine me, tried to take what was rightfully mine, and even when the stakes were highest, truth and wisdom won the day. Karma has a patient way of ensuring justice, not immediate, not always obvious, but inevitable. By standing firm and acting wisely, I protected not just a house, but dignity, peace, and a lesson that respect is earned, never demanded. After the courtroom victory, life returned to a fragile calm, but I knew better than to think that the drama was fully behind us. Family, after all, has a way of keeping tension alive even in moments of peace. Emily, humbled and shaken by the legal defeat, approached me one morning with a quiet demeanor I had never seen before. "Dad," she said softly, "I've been thinking, maybe I need to start over. I need to build my life without trying to control yours." I nodded, sensing the sincerity behind her words, though part of me remained wary. Years of manipulation aren't undone in a single conversation. "Emily," I replied, "it's a good start. Remember, respect and honesty go farther than demands and anger." She smiled faintly, the first genuine smile in months, and I felt a flicker of hope for our relationship. But peace, as always, is tested. A few weeks later, I received a call from a distant cousin I barely knew. "John," he said nervously, "you need to know, there's a family meeting. Emily's been talking, and some relatives are upset about the house transfer. They think you've done something unfair." I sighed deeply. The thought of another confrontation made my chest tighten, but I refused to panic. Life had taught me patience. I prepared myself for what was likely to be a heated gathering. I gathered all necessary documents, printed copies of the legal decisions, and rehearsed calm responses to likely accusations. The meeting took place at Aunt Margaret's house, a modest home with creaky floors and overstuffed chairs. Emily was there, surprisingly composed. Mark sat quietly beside her. The room was filled with murmurs of disapproval from cousins, uncles, and a few neighbors who had caught wind of the situation. "John," Aunt Margaret began, frowning, "we're concerned about the house transfer. Is this really fair to Emily? Shouldn't family inherit property in a traditional way?" I took a deep breath and spoke slowly, deliberately. The house was mine to decide. I followed every legal step. Emily tried to interfere, and the court confirmed that my actions were legitimate. This isn't about tradition. It's about respect, legality, and the choices we make for our own lives. Some relatives muttered, others frowned, but I could see the seeds of doubt forming in their eyes. Emily, standing beside me, spoke up quietly but firmly. "Everyone, I've learned the hard way. I tried to take control of Dad's life when it wasn't mine to control. I understand now, and I support his decisions fully." The room fell silent. There was no arguing with that kind of honesty. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, realizing that Emily's change of heart validated my actions. Days passed, and gradually, the family tension began to dissolve. Emily started focusing on her own life, investing in her small business, volunteering at a local community center, and repairing relationships outside the shadow of conflict. Mark learned from his impulsiveness and became a more thoughtful partner. I, meanwhile, enjoyed the quiet satisfaction of my morning walks, tending the garden, and the peaceful routines that I had fought so hard to protect. But then, as if life hadn't already tested my patience enough, an unexpected twist appeared. One morning, a letter arrived from a neighbor, Mrs. Wilkins, an elderly widow who had lived down the street for decades. "John," she wrote, "I heard about all the trouble with Emily in the house. I just want to say, if you ever decide to move, I'd love to purchase it. Your home has always been a place of warmth and integrity, and I'd be honored to continue that legacy." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Here was someone who appreciated the values I'd fought to protect, someone who understood that a home is more than walls and furniture. It is a sanctuary, a reflection of character. The final test came unexpectedly. Emily, in a rare moment of reflection, approached me one evening with a small, wrapped box. "Dad," she said, voice trembling slightly, "I wanted to make amends in my own way. This is for you." I opened it carefully. Inside was a handcrafted photo album, filled with pictures of family gatherings, holidays, and quiet moments over the years. On the last page, she had written, "Thank you for teaching me the value of respect, patience, and integrity. I love you, Dad." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. After months of chaos, manipulation, and conflict, this simple gesture carried more weight than any legal victory or courtroom triumph. And then, the final, most satisfying moment of justice arrived. My own quiet triumph over the manipulation and disrespect I had endured. I invited my neighbors and friends over for a small celebration, a way to honor not just the house, but the life we built inside it. As we sat around the fireplace, laughing, sharing stories, and enjoying simple pleasures, I realized that the battle with Emily and her schemes had left a permanent mark, not just on our relationship, but on my understanding of resilience, patience, and karma. Life had tested me, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more at peace than I had ever been. The moral of this story, the lesson etched into my heart after months of turmoil, is simple. Family conflicts will arise, often unexpectedly and painfully, but standing firm in your values, respecting yourself, and acting with wisdom always leads to justice. Those who seek to manipulate, control, or undermine you may cause temporary chaos, but the truth, legality, and moral strength always find a way to prevail. Emily tried to take my home, my dignity, and my peace, but in the end, respect, patience, and truth won, not just for me, but for everyone who witnessed the consequences of her actions. Karma works in its own time, and when it arrives, it brings lessons that are unforgettable. As I sit by the fireplace now, watching the flames dance and feeling the warmth spread through the room, I can finally smile without fear or anger. My home, my sanctuary, remains mine, protected by the choices I made, the patience I practiced, and the wisdom I refused to compromise. Emily and Mark have learned their lessons. Family respect has been restored, and I can finally live in the peace I fought so hard to achieve. Life, in all its twists, turns, and dramatic moments, has a way of showing who is truly deserving of respect, love, and justice. And in this case, justice, patience, and a firm heart prevailed.